Through the mists comes forth RPGaDay! In the year 2021, RPGaDay comes back for its 8th year. A time in August when every day we tackle another question or topic by answering in a way that uplifts the gaming community and answers questions people might have about this crazy hobby of ours that serves to build the community and bring it up, that many of us make blogs about, video blogs, art, or great works. In celebration of the community of gamers, I welcome you to RPGaDay 2021. Hello friends, I am Rob, the Dungeon Tutor, also Omnisci. But today I'm here for RPGaDay. And this one, on the 22nd of 2021, the word for today is substitute. Now, a lot of people over the last year had to deal with substitutions for things that they really loved. The quarantine from the coronavirus was rough on a lot of people. But one of the things that really suffered, even while the hobby enjoyed something of a boom period, was role-playing games. Without that face-to-face interaction for a lot of people, role-playing games were hard to get at. And although the resources for playing online swelled tremendously, you had Roll20, biggest it's ever been, Discord for voice and text, bigger than it's ever been, Zoom shot into prominence, but also I know people who've played on Skype, Fantasy Grounds, Forge. There's a lot of different venues that people have discovered and really kind of made their own. But that's not really for everybody. Some people don't have a stable enough internet connection and may not even have a computer. And just in case we all fall into that dark place again where we have to go through a quarantine or something like that, I think it's interesting to look back at some of the different ways that we substituted for our hobbies, for those of us who really do love role-playing games. First of all, tabletop role-playing games really don't have a true substitute. There's no other media that allows you the kind of interaction, innovation that's possible when you have a human sitting across the table from you who is basically the arbiter of the world around you. But we struggled. We've made ends meet, and we found different substitutes. These are some of the more common ones and ones that I've dabbled in myself. First of all, probably the easiest one for a lot of people are video games. Now, video games are quite simple. You just have the front-end cost of the game, the front-end cost of the console, the TV and you, and that's it. You can play whenever you want. You can play for as long as you want, assuming the rest of the world doesn't keep you away from it. And there's so many different games out there that you have a nearly inexhaustible list in a person's lifetime. I don't know if anybody could play all the different games that are available out there. Now, I myself, I do enjoy video games. Perhaps not as much as I used to, because my passions have really been thrown into role-playing games for the tabletop. But there are still some. And I do enjoy video game role-playing games as well. The feeling of leveling up your characters and going through an interesting story. Examples that I have for this of the former kind would be something like Xanadu, which was a game that came out for the Nintendo Entertainment System. It was a platforming, side-scrolling adventure role-playing game of sorts. It had a defined story. Your home village is at the base of the Yggdrasil, the world tree from Norse mythology. And the world was being corrupted, the tree was rotting, and you had to go and fix it. quite the goal. And it was a rather clunky platformer where you would run all over the place, frequently backtracking, finding keys, getting into dungeons, upgrading your weaponry. It was quite honestly that first dagger that you started with was so puny, so difficult to use. And then as you got better and better weapons, the game got so much easier for you. But the probabilities of death and dying, and sometimes rather ignominiously, and having to backtrack, were always in front of you. Those classic games were kind of crude. Also, not the kind of satisfaction that you get from a role-playing game because your path is very linear. You can't think of anything innovative or creative to do. You just kind of go along the path that's set in front of you. Even though it seems like it's somewhat open world and that you can climb up and down and go back and forth, left and right, go back over old ground, it's a false open world, as you still have to follow the paths to progress into the game, and progressing unlocks new areas so that you can expand the world larger and larger. Eventually there's quite a bit of verticality as you are scaling up the tree. The monsters get bigger and nastier, and it's overall a good game. Not the greatest of games, but just one that I picked as a representative example. And then moving up many generations, we have games like Final Fantasy X, which I have the 10-10-2 combination disc on PS3. And Final Fantasy had great story all throughout. Great story, and watching your characters advance and get new weapons and gear was pretty cool. Even from the first Final Fantasy, there were some elements of that, but the storyline elements and cinematics just got better and better and better. Really, I think, overall, story with multiple character development, I think, got probably at its peak at Final Fantasy VI, 3 here in the States. 7 was absolutely brilliant, and as things went on, the stories just got richer and richer and more full, and the spectacle of the games got greater and greater. Now, of course, games like these can be beaten. You will eventually get to the end. If you play long enough, you'll get to the end of Final Fantasy X. You will get to the end of Xanadu. It might cost you some blisters. It might cost you, tens of hours. In the case of the Final Fantasy games, as much as 100 hours I've spent. It was 108 hours in Final Fantasy VII, going through and 100%ing the game. And you can do that, absolutely. In the end, however, you will have told exactly the same story as countless other people who've played that game. You're enjoying the same experience, even though it's a great experience. It's a curated experience where you really can't deviate from the path. That decrepit door hanging off its hinge, if the game doesn't want you to go through there, you can't go through there. You can't see what's beyond the boundaries of what's in front of you on the screen. You can't pry back, and unless there's a side quest that takes you in that direction, you can't go in that direction. So they are a visual feast sometimes. They can be really good storytelling as far as the writing of the actual story. In cases, some of the animation and voice acting can be brilliant. But you're basically watching a movie with video game elements when it gets to that point. And yeah, sure, there are plenty of games that you can play and never beat, especially the first-person shooters where you can play against other people. But I never really found those to be all that engaging myself, because while you can never beat them, you can eventually get progression in terms of rank and such, but it's always going to turn out you're going to get killed by some 12-year-old kid who plays the game for 14 hours a day and is really good. The barrier for entry is pretty high. And yeah, you could say, go get good at it and then play, and I just never really wanted to. Other people do, and I find also that the satisfaction of actually beating a game, getting through it to its final completion, whatever you determine that completion to be, by the way, it doesn't necessarily have to be 100%ing it, finding every secret, every item, everything. I define it by getting to the end of the story and seeing what's at the end of it. And that's not necessarily going back and playing all the difficulty levels either. Sometimes I just want to see what the story is all about. And if that's the case, I actually have a chance of getting through all the games I have. Because if I said 100% at every single game I have, no. I just don't have that kind of time. I need an entire career based around playing video games to do something like that. And that's not likely. So, video games certainly can salve some of the wounds of not being able to play role-playing games. And I know people whose groups have broken up and they can't find people and whatever who do that. Also, it has something of a siren song to it. That accessibility at any time certainly can be attractive. And quite honestly, that's how games like World of Warcraft really snare people. In that you can show up with other people to kind of salve some of that, get some of that interpersonal interaction, living vicariously through an avatar in a massively multiplayer online game. And you can adventure with people, you can have interactions with people in the guise of your fantasy character, which is cool, no doubt. But again, it's got the same problems as any video games in that, yeah, let's go do this quest, the same quest that thousands of others have already done, or millions in some cases. Maybe if we run this raid this way, it'll be a little different, or this will be a little more of a challenge. Artificial constructs, basically, so that you can make the experience a little bit different, a little bit more satisfying, perhaps. But ultimately, it's doing the same thing over and over again, and all of those games end up, if you are ultimately successful at them, at grinding at the raids at the end and just doing the same content again and again, trying to get the coolest prizes and the best gear and things like that. Doesn't really grip me, but I know it does for a lot of people. But again, compared to telling epic stories with your friends and at a tabletop, it's pretty shabby replacement for me. Although, again, it satisfies for others. Another option that you might have might be, and this is certainly one that has done some wonders to for the role-playing game community, card games. Collectible card games have certainly become a huge force in the game industry. For example, Magic the Gathering, yeah, this one really wrecked us. When card floppers began to overnumber the dice chuckers. And yeah, it was kind of a war, honestly. Some people really thought, as well as they were doing, that these kind of cards were going to eventually replace the kind of prominence, such as it was, of role-playing games. And yeah, I have to admit, I played Magic the Gathering for quite a bit. It never really overtook role-playing games as my selection of entertainment of choice, but it was when all my friends were playing, and we just get together, and that's what we might do for an evening. Was pretty cool. We got to do some neat things. And sure, if you have the cool cards, and you can make the awesome deck, it's fun. The random element certainly means that your experiences are going to be different from game to game, and that the fact that one person may have rarer cards than you, or got luckier and got the combination that really, really works well, they're still not always going to win. Sometimes they'll get a bad hand, sometimes you'll get the perfect hand, but as it's evolved, it's difficult and expensive to keep up with it. A person with a newer deck can usually have a sizable advantage over somebody with an older deck, just because they keep ramping up the power level of the cards and making new ones. And the fact now that they have the latest set of Magic crossed over with Dungeons and Dragons only means that it's more irresistible for people like me, but not to play. I mean, I don't even know what I would do with a Lulth Spider Queen. I mean, I'm sure she's powerful, but I don't know, she's a planeswalker of some sort, and I can't say I'm entirely certain what that means. So, it's been a long time since I played Magic the Gathering, to be honest. So I grabbed a couple of packs of them, and those are interesting. But I mean, that's just scratching the tip of the iceberg, to mangle my metaphors. Yeah, that was really bad. As far as collectible card games go, if you get tired of Magic the Gathering, you can go on to Yu-Gi-Oh! That's a crazy trip. I've seen some of the cards for that, and wow. Wide open imagination, very few filters. You've got dragons, and then you've got wind-up cats, and you've got just everything, just scattershot. Which is, it's still cool. not my game, but I know people who really like it, and they have some pretty fierce tournaments around here. If you're a little younger at heart, Pokemon, the game of basically gladiatorial combat with cute, fluffy creatures. It's certainly a game that captures people's imaginations and attention, and some people love the Pokemon franchise for a variety of reasons. The trading card game is not the least of those. So, people like that. And for those games like Force of Will, games like Magic, that have survived the test of time, that have had several editions and have done pretty well, there's any number, if you go back, of Highlander, the card game, Sim City, the card game, Monty Python, the Holy Grail, the card game. All these ones that came out and just didn't. They might have had an edition or two, but they barely made a blip on the radar. Especially when they're an intellectual property that I think they were kind of hoping people would glom onto, make a splash, make a quick profit, but I'm sure a lot of them just died. Some of them weren't very fun. The Highlander game wasn't all that engaging. Star Wars Young Jedi came out at a time when, well, quite honestly, there was a lot of hatred going around for the prequels, so the fact it came around the time, I believe, of Episode 1 or Episode 2, just... Yeah, the Star Wars collectible card game was pretty successful, and a lot of good humor and some interesting cards in there. The Star Trek collectible card game was pretty good from what I remember. My friends really loved that. I'm not Trekkie, so I didn't play it much, but they showed me how it worked, and it was interesting, certainly. And looking at the dynamics of all these card games can be fascinating. Figuring out why they failed, figuring out, how you had victory conditions that changed from one to the other. You had some that were confused messes that really didn't have excellent game design, like Spellfire. Oh, and interestingly enough, I am charmed that Magic the Gathering stuck its neck out and put out a Dungeons and Dragons card game, considering how those failed pretty badly. Spellfire, Warlord, it's not good. Not good. So, and even ones that you think couldn't possibly fail. You'd have a game like, World of Warcraft, the card game. Yeah, it came out and it had some expansions, but could you really call that a wild success? I don't know. I never, again, not much of a blip on the radar as far as most people are concerned, so I don't really consider it to be all that much of a success myself. Although I'm sure it pushed a lot of cardboard. I'm sure it did okay, but it wasn't a Magic the Gathering killer, for instance. So, and perhaps it could be that the World of Warcraft franchise has declined quite a bit. So, a little bit of everything, I guess. So collectible card games, and card games in general, quite honestly, card games are a huge, huge franchise, even taking away the collectible part of it. If you've ever played the Red Dragon Inn, for instance, one of my personal favorites, you can have a great time just competitively playing with your friends in a game where, you're not really attacking them so much as accidents happen to your friends, and if they get knocked out in the bar, you're still going to stand over them and loot their bodies. It's lighthearted on purpose, but it can be fun and competitive, getting your teammates drunk, and again, rolling their bodies, maybe running them out of money so they're out of the competition so that you could be the last Delver left standing. It's just a fun game with a simple mechanic and so many different characters to choose from. Even if you get one of the basic packs alone, you're still going to have plenty of opportunities to play with others and just enough effect, having actual coins to throw in on things like gambling and stuff, and easy to resolve mechanics really make it a solid game. But that's just scratching the tip of the iceberg. Flux is another one that I enjoy quite a bit. My son and I enjoy playing a quick game of Flux from time to time, or pulling other people in can sometimes just make the games go faster. You never know. Companies like GameRight that have been putting out lots of simple and easy to comprehend games that can go quick and still give you an entertaining time can be a lot of fun. And if you're contemplating card games, then going right along into board games just makes sense. Board games, however, have the problem that it's a face-to-face activity. So if you're quarantined with people, board games are an attractive option. It gives you lots of different things that you can do, and just by changing the game itself, you can change the rules, you can break out of a rut, for instance. A couple of people who just play Monopoly all the time, to me, seems like a huge waste of opportunity for slipping in something like Risk, or Diplomacy, or, oh my god, so many different options. And you have some board games that mirror games that you might enjoy. For instance, Dragon Strike is an amusing enough game if you don't have the ability to play Dungeons and Dragons. Dragon Strike isn't a bad game at all. And allows you to kind of get a solo play experience. We'll talk about solo play games later on. That'll be a topic for another game. But yeah, the whole idea of these games are their pastimes, they're entertainments. They don't really build one on top of the other like a role-playing game does, where you can see your characters advance and go through a rich and continuous story. They're designed for bite-sized chunks of entertainment, and they serve admirably. You know, I've got lots of board games that I absolutely love, and if I don't feel up to role-playing, because there's a commitment to role-playing, sometimes you have to be in a decent frame of mind, and sometimes that just doesn't happen. Sometimes you're just too exhausted for something like that. A board game can be a nice way of just capping off a night rather than play a bad night of role-playing. Although, honestly, I'd pick a bad night of role-playing with other people than good nights of some other things, but still, I digress. So, board games are certainly an opportunity for things like that. Even if they're a simple dice game, like Liar's Dice, Pirate's Dice, or, let's see what we have. Something like this, Riddles and Riches, which we're going to be doing a cardboard video on really soon. So, interesting stuff. I would definitely say that if you can't play role-playing games, board games are not a bad way of scratching the itch. They are not individually as satisfying as a role-playing game because you're still having the same problems you had with video games. You are bounded by rules, even if you come up with house rules. For instance, I know lots of people who play something like Monopoly and have plenty of house rules in there. My father was very fond of house ruling Monopoly when we'd play, especially allowing you to take less than what you were due in terms of trading for real estate and property, and it's okay. Yep. Remember that. So, yeah, these are different ways that you can substitute. And then, of course, for those of us who play role-playing games, a lot of us just enjoy reading. And there are a lot of really good books out there. If you want an opportunity to clear out your Appendix N checklist from the infamous Appendix N, from the Player's Handbook of Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, where Gary and the other people behind Dungeons and Dragons listed their literary inspirations, some people took it upon themselves to go back and read through some of those books. Some of them are a little harsh, yeah. I'm not going to claim I've read all of them, but yeah, reading and refueling and maybe, you know, re-inspiring you for further adventures and, you know, expanding your horizons is not a bad idea. And if you want to dovetail that in with gaming, you can go back and try to find game books. Books that themselves are an adventure. The classics are the choose your own adventure, but I always found those to be, well, they're written for kids. So, they're very simplistic. The paths you have are fairly linear, but it was a great idea. But even more interesting for those of us who enjoy the games would be game books like the Lone Wolf series by Joe Dever, or Greystar the Wizard series, or he had another one that was kind of a post-apocalyptic road a la Mad Max game. By the way, if you're interested in any of those, trying them as an opportunity, check on the Aeon project. A-O-N, I believe. Before he passed away, rest in peace, Joe, Mr. Dever basically open sourced all of his stuff so that anybody can read it and look at it and play his games online, which, Lord, there are some companies that I really wish would do that. Because there are some that, even talking to the author, since they sold their book, basically their work, the company that owns their work won't ever reproduce it, which is sad, because you can't play games like Grail Quest by Herbie Brennan unless you're lucky enough to stumble on one of those books. And Mr. Brennan, while a brilliant man and a very nice guy, he just simply doesn't own the book, so he can't republish them anymore. He'd have to do work to get the franchise to revert back to him as the author. And good luck. A lot of those companies hold on to their IPs like a dragon hoarding gold, but never use it, which is really sad. But those were great games. I loved those. I think it's what's the name of the company? I can't remember. Orb Publishing or something, but the Way of the Ninja series was a really good one. There's some really good game books out there. Gary Gygax, one of the founders of Dungeons and Dragons, had his own game books that he put out. Most notably to me were the Sagard the Barbarian books. He had an interesting world that he spun out with it, and the stories were entertaining, and it's well worth picking up if you ever see them. That's all I'll say. They're nice little books. I will say, though, if you get the Sagard books, do yourself a favor, keep a 4-sided die along with you. It's much better than flipping the pages, because the damage you do to the books is not worth it. And if you play the Lone Wolf books, and you have the books, roll a 10-sided die rather than using a pencil on the page that they tell you to. It's much better that way. So yeah, look for alternates to the things that they suggest. If you get one of the Grail Quest books, use photocopies of the pages they want you to cut things out of. Oh, they're so good though. So good. I can't recommend them enough. So yeah, there are substitutions out there. There are other pastimes. I've delved into them. Plenty of other gamers have delved into them. If you're curious about some of the board games that might tickle your fancy outside of the norms that you walk through the big box stores and you'll see many kinds of games, but you realize that a lot of them are the same games or similar to others. I, of course, have a little side channel in my Laravanum side channel called Cardboard, where I and my son show off different games. And if you're curious about any games, let us know, and we will make a video for you about that game. Certainly not opposed to doing modern ones, although I have a penchant for doing classic and vintage games. As you saw from the games that I showed you, I generally tend to look backwards through the nostalgia glasses at the games that I like, but I'm not saying there's anything wrong with modern games at all. So that's basically my take on substitutes. Finding substitutions for role-playing games is really hard, and none of them are as satisfying as getting together with some friends and playing a rich and detailed game, or even, honestly, just a beer and pretzels games with friends are better. But role-playing games are, in my mind, and this is my pure opinion, the most superior entertainment that you can have with other people in a given space. Especially if everybody is participating and everybody knows the rules and the game goes smoothly, it's almost impossible to find something better. It's a drug that you almost can't escape the addiction to if you really allow yourself to get into it. So, guilty as charged. Thanks for joining me on my meandering path through the various substitutions for gaming. If you have any experiences of your own, you'd like to talk about them, or you're again, curious about any of the things I said, feel free to leave a comment below. If you like the video, like and subscribe. I appreciate it. Keeps me motivated to keep moving on. And, of course, if you have any friends who are like, oh, gosh, I need something to do, feel free to link the video to them and send them a little love. And maybe some of my ideas will fall on fertile ground. But I have more videos yet to make this month, so stick with us and we will have more videos for you. And until the next one, Thanks for joining me. I'm Rob, the Dungeon Tutor, sometimes Omnisci, and I'll see you the next time. Farewell.